When I think of a mansion, or at least a historical mansion, I think of a place like Mount Vernon. However, when I got to the Whitehill mansion, there was a huge gate that surrounded the house. It was a house in dire need of repairs. There was paint chipping off of the walls. They recently had to remove a large honeybee nest, and the house had way too many creaking floorboards. Just one look at the place was enough to produce chills down your spine. The house is haunted by ghosts that are too many to count. With all the history that went on there, the number of people that have died in or around the house will shock you. The house was placed on a Lenape settlement where the tribe would spend the winter. The tribes would come together to make fires and to get warm. Some say that this has unleashed the spirits of Native Americans.
Lenape artifacts have been located on the property. We've had 2 archaeological digs, one I believe in 2011 and one in 2012. And several Lenape artifacts were dug up at that time. The Lenape would set up encampment here during the winter. Because the artifacts that were found here were oyster shells and different animal bones and arrowheads, a lot of fragments of tools and things like that. Basically, all we really know about the Lenape is that this is where they would reside during the winter months into the spring, and then they would relocate, go closer to the Jersey Shore during the warmer months. But yeah, there have been Native American spirits that have been seen on the outside of the house along the tree line, and some of them have been solid figures. And there have also been phantom campfires, in the woods. So that's interesting, because they were there, and then just as someone's about to call 911 and say the woods are on fire, they go back and there's no fire there.
When the house was first built, it was the house of Robert Field II, his wife Mary Peel, and his 7 children. Sadly, only 3 of the children lived to adulthood. Some say that the ghosts of the children still haunt parts of the house.
Some of the things that I've had happen here, aren't necessarily spooky, but they're sad. There are the possibility of children's spirits being here, and there are times when I feel like a cold spot up against my leg, like a little kid trying to hug onto the side of my leg, or I am a mom and everything, so it seems like, when toddlers or whatever are trying to hug their mom because they're afraid because there's a bunch of people in their house.
One day, Robert Field II drowned nearby in the Delaware River. Some say that his death was too suspicious.
He was a member of the Correspondence Committee, and he would travel back and forth to Philadelphia to meet with other people who became founding fathers to protest the taxation of the colonists without representation to the King of England, King George. While he's traveling back and forth to Philadelphia, he fell off his boat and drowned in the Delaware. The servant that was with him had changed his stories a few times. His death did appear in the local newspaper, which we have a copy of here. And it doesn't give any actual circumstances surrounding his death, mainly because the story kept changing on the manservant's. Every retelling was a little bit different. So that's kind of what made his death suspicious, and also the fact that he was a wealthy person who owned land, a great deal of land that encompassed Fieldsboro and Bordentown at the time. And the people in the circles that he kind of was socializing with a lot of them were loyalists. So that kind of leaves some suspicion surrounding what happened to him. There were a lot of people, I would imagine, that may have wanted to cause him harm, because he was also doing other things like running guns to the natives, and he was also a privateer, so he was capturing pirate ships and returning the goods that were stolen by those pirates to the crown.
Robert II's son, Robert III, lost the house due to mismanagement. He was friends with the signer of the Declaration of Independence, Richard Stockton. This allowed Robert III and his wife Abigail to remain at the mansion. Stockton's wife, Annis, was an accomplished poet and beloved friend of George Washington. Annis would frequently write to Washington until his death in 1799. That same year, Annis wrote that she was unable to walk. She had to spend all day in bed. On February 6, 1801, Anna Stockton died at the White Hill Mansion. She was 64.
So throughout the house, there are possibilities of Annis making herself known. There has been a woman who spoke French on the stairway at one point, where one of the president of our organization captured a woman speaking French. They didn't see anything, but they captured that. But Mary Field also spoke French as well, so we're not entirely sure if that activity could be contributed to Annis. But in her room, the room that we understand that she passed away in, we have had visitors and some former volunteers notice a blue mist that comes up through the floor or goes back down through the floor. I personally have not experienced it. I have experienced cold spots in her room that weren't, in the summer when it's a little hard to find a cold spot in this house because there's no central air conditioning or anything like that.
When I went into the basement, it was not what I was expecting at all. I expected paint chipping off of the walls, exposed lath coming out of the ceiling, and cobwebs like every other room of the house. However, I did not expect it to be a restored open bar. Restaurateur and German immigrant Henry Glank brought his family recipes to the United States. In 1922, he opened a successful restaurant until 1972. The restaurant operated successfully even after his death in 1952. 20 years later, Glank catered to politicians, celebrities of the day, and even mobsters and crime lords during Prohibition. The restaurant functioned as a speakeasy for mobsters. There remains to this day a terrifying ghost in the basement.
We have one gentleman who we believe is from that mobster time period, 1920s, 30s, maybe even 40s, when the mafia was really flourishing. And he can be a little intimidating. A lot of times they're words of violence, like, I'll kill you, or things like that. I mean, he is all talk, but, or if there are women in the room and women are asking him questions, he will call them names that, I will not say here. He likes to use a lot of derogatory words, let's put it that way, and likes to sound very threatening. And in the attic, I wasn't sure who it was because I was newer here at the time, but I was hearing one footstep at a time, like hard-soled shoes, coming up each one of those stairs. And it was like horror movie, painfully slow, a step, a few seconds go by, step, and then I looked over at the doorway and there was some light in the room and the doorway disappeared just behind a black shadow.
With all the history that went on in the White Hill Mansion, I was surprised to see how much renovation there needed. I was also surprised to see how much a full-on renovation would cost.
Several years ago, prior to COVID, I think the estimate was $7 million. to have all the work done, the project completion. As of today, in 2023, so I think that estimate was in 2016 or 2014 maybe, but today, because the cost of construction has skyrocketed, it would probably be at least double that. So I want to say like 14 million to 25 million. I mean, we're talking a lot of money. So that's why we just keep plugging along, and eventually, maybe someday, it will be restored. History was my favorite subject, even before, it was called history. It was social studies initially through elementary school for me, and then it was turned into history. But it had always been my favorite subject. And so I've always had this draw to old houses, and I've always had this draw to want to help educate people about historical events and properties and things like that. So that was initially my draw to history, but then when I'm sitting out on this lawn in front of this house that is 300 years old, I mean, it wasn't quite at that time, but I don't know, it was like a magnetic pull. Yeah, it's a wonderful group of people though, and we've turned into a family, so I plan on being here forever if they let me.
What draws you to the house?
I don't know if that's even something I can put into words. Aside from being an old house, that I just have a draw to old houses and history, and I think about the people who walked through this front door. Like how many people through the last 300 years have walked through this house and have walked on these original floorboards. Annis was very good friends with George Washington. I mean, we know Annis Stockton walked through this house. We know many, very important officers in the Revolutionary War walked through these halls and sat in these very rooms right here, and to be able to sit in these rooms and to be able to be lucky enough to be able to help save something like this is a big draw to me, because I would love for my grandkids and my great-grandkids and so on and so forth to have these pieces of history preserved and not, turned to dust. To have places like this that embody these walls witnessed the revolution. These walls witnessed Hessian soldiers camping out front, and even having tea here with Merrifield. None of us were here for that, and nobody in the future will have been here for that. But to have these places saved so that you can walk through and be in the places where these things happened, I think is important. Just, for the future of where we as a country are going.